Hello everybody, this is Kate Wakelin from Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia, and I am joining you live today, this Facebook Friday, with a special guest whose name is Jacqueline Gillespie, and I'll tell you a bit more about Jacqueline in just a moment. But before I go any further, I did want to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm streaming to you from. That's the land of the Wurundjeri people, part of the Kulin Nation, and just wanted to pay respects to elders past and present and emerging. And I always put this in because it's special to me, and that is that I love to go running along the Yarra River, which is just close to my place, and that's called the Birrawong in the local language. So just gratitude for where we are, and I know that you're watching me from all sorts of locations, so really happy to have you along with us. So I can see someone has clicked that we're live, which is exciting. So let's see how long it lasts, because those of you who have joined us in previous two-person conversations know that this can be a bit precarious. So rest assured, if you're watching this and it goes blank on your screen on Facebook, we're recording it, so we'll load the video up later. So anyway, without any, just before I do introduce Jacqueline, the other thing I just wanted to mention, just by way of an update about COVID-19, which we do each week. Kudos to you if you don't live in Victoria. If you don't live in Victoria and you're grumpy because we've sent you some cases, then can I just apologise on behalf of all Victorians? It's a bit scary down here in Melbourne because there's been a lot of local transmission, community transmission, and I guess it's just a good reminder to us all that this ain't over yet and we all need to take lots of care. Part of taking care, the questions that about taking care that have arisen certainly in our community, and I know more broadly in the cancer community, is around wearing masks. And I'm really pleased to let you know that we now have some more firm guidance from the Cancer Council in terms of, for people with cancer who may be immunocompromised, what needs to be kept in mind, I guess, about wearing masks. So I'm really pleased about that. I think it will be helpful to have that information. I've actually posted it in the Facebook private discussion group just now, but I will make sure I put some notes in with this video as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jacqueline Gillespie. Jacqueline, I'll let you introduce yourself actually, if that's okay. So would you mind telling us how you've come to be beaming in live to a Facebook support group for people with neuroendocrine cancers, and also a little, just a brief mention about your role with Neuroendocrine Cancer Australia, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone. It's great to be here, and thanks Kate for all the work you've been doing on Facebook Fridays. I think they've been really helpful to everybody, and I know for me. Yes, I asked myself this question: how did I happen to come to be here? My journey is probably similar to many of you. I was diagnosed about 4 years ago with neuroendocrine cancer after many years of very strange experiences, of weird symptoms, misdiagnosis. I was living overseas actually for many years before I was diagnosed. So I ended up in many hospitals in Asia with what people thought were heart disease. I was evacuated out of Malacca. I ended up in a Shanghai hospital. I was quite an interesting case for them. Finally back here in Australia, I was diagnosed with neuroendocrine cancer. I have the primary is in the small bowel, and which had metastasized to the liver. So like many of you, I have a regular scanning process. I have monthly injections, and I've had several different treatments to manage the cancer. So when I first was diagnosed, I was working really in a very large role with a consulting firm, and I eventually decided to kind of pull back from that, but I wanted to do something a bit more meaningful while I wasn't working full time. So I really I saw the opportunity to join the Consumer Advisory Group with the Unicorn Foundation as a way to do that. So I wanted to contribute and also learn, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here today. I've been working on a project with a number of others, and I think it's a really important topic, and I've found it very helpful to me, but hopefully it will be helpful to lots of people out there as well.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Jacqueline. And I think that's actually a really perfect segue to what we have actually come together to talk about in today's broadcast. And that's a study called Getting Results. So just as a background to that study, I had a conversation with Dr. Nick Pavlakis, who lots of you will be familiar with if you're in New South Wales. He's a well-known NET specialist, and was talking to me at this conference. We were at the poster stands, and he was talking to me about the trickinesses for doctors around communicating the results of scans. And there was a number of layers to that. It was around the timing of that, but also, well, what information do patients actually really want? Are pictures on a screen helpful? Is a printed handout helpful? What do patients actually want? And knowing that we have a consumer advisory group and a lot of links with patients with neuroendocrine cancer, is keen to do some work with us to sort of drill down so that we could work out not only what is useful for oncologists to know about how to communicate with patients, but actually maybe also with the other aim of improving consistency around reporting, so that reports around Australia for people with neuroendocrine cancer and looking at their scans, that those reports from various hospitals and scanning clinics and the radiologists' reports would have some consistency in the type of things that they report on, so that you can more easily compare apples with apples. So that was the conversation that started all of this. It was at the ENETS conference in Barcelona 2019, so it was quite a long time ago. So in discussing this with the consumer advisory group, we the conclusion was really that perhaps an online focus group would be a good place to start, and we decided to run that focus group with our consumer advisory group, because that's a primary part of the reason we have these people in our group, is to really be able to drill down and get some really good understanding of what it's like to be living with this disease. Jacqueline, I'm just wondering if, and knowing that you were really central in setting this up and driving the conversation in that group, I'm just wondering if you could tell me a bit about what we found, about some of the themes that we discovered in that conversation.
Yeah. So there were some themes, even though I guess one of the key findings in the focus group was that there is a wide range of experiences with scans and getting results. So there is as many experiences as there are people with NETs, I think, is what's very clear. And so it really reinforced the fact that there is no consistent process, if you like, or standard, and that people are having good experiences, average experiences, bad experiences, and it's something that we need to kind of learn from, I think. Some of the themes that came through when we ran that focus group were, well, firstly, the fact that everyone had different experiences, but the first kind of theme that did emerge is that what's really important to patients, to all of us, is the time frame. So most people obviously would like to know the results as quickly as possible. So, but the experience is very different. So we had people in our focus group that were waiting and waiting. So some patients were getting their results on the same day, and then other patients were waiting 2 to 3 months to get their results, which seems an enormous amount of time. And of course, we know the impact on us waiting and the anxiety that creates is very real. So
I was just sorry to interrupt you, Jacqueline. I was actually wondering if you can tell us about what that's like from your own experiences. Is the anxiety leading up to the scan different from the anxiety between having the scan and getting the results? And what's that like for, just if that's okay for me to ask you personally?
Yeah. Well, for me, it is. It seems to be the same pattern that I have every time I have a scan, and I get scanned 4 times a year, so it's very regular, which I like. The fact it's regular, that gives me some assurity that we're on top of it. But I have the scan, and that creates a bit of anxiety. And then I think about it a lot until I have my appointment. And then I have to say about 2 days before my appointment for the results, that's where my anxiety escalates. So, and I feel, I have what I'm sure many people have on this call, which is I feel anxious. I start to worry about the future. I create really big mountains to climb that may not actually exist. And I think the main thing is kind of this sense of vulnerability, because I can't plan my life until I know what that result is. That's how I often feel. And one of the things that a term I've used, which I don't think is a good one, is it feels like Russian roulette. I feel like I'm rolling a dice and I'm not sure where it's going to land. Some of these imageries come in which are not that helpful. So what I liked about doing this project was I learned a lot from what other people do to manage that anxiety. But I'm sure that, and then that goes away once I have my results, because I'm in action, and then it builds again to the next time. So I'm sure that's not uncommon for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's certainly something that I hear when I'm talking to people on the phone as well. I'm just wondering, Jacqueline, does it change? I know that you've had treatment, so you've clearly had scans where the results have been, less than ideal, and you've needed to change tack, have a different treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Is there still a sense that for those sorts of scans, getting the results is like an anticlimax given the amount of anxiety? What's that like for you? I don't know if that question makes any sense. Does that make any sense to you?
So you after an actual treatment, after an intervention?
Well, when you've had a scan result that's been not ideal,
yes.
Is that still, does that warrant the anxiety that you had leading up to it, I guess is the question.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, for me, probably not, because for me, I've been fortunate in that I have a slow growing cancer, and a lot of the treatments are proactive at this point. So the anxiety I feel probably isn't warranted with what the outcomes are, because the treatments are shrinking, there's not rapid growth. So, it's not imbalanced, but it doesn't stop me being anxious.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
That's still a reality for me.
So I know that we talked a bit about the things that came out of the online group, and I interrupted you to ask you about your own experiences. I just wanted to check in to make sure there wasn't anything else that you were going to add about that.
Yeah, I think in terms of the themes, I think there were 2 other themes that I think are really important. One is people in the focus group talked about how they wanted to be communicated with, and really, and how they want the results to be kind of presented to them. And I think that's a really important thing for our oncologists out there, which is one of the people in the focus groups talked about they want a holistic and comprehensive result. So they don't just want the result of that scan, but ideally this idea of having how the scan compared to previous scans, bringing in the blood results, bringing in other urine or whatever other tests have been done, so that there's sense of being communicated very holistically, and that it's done in an unrushed manner, which we know many of our oncologists are extremely busy, and that there's this kind of dialogue that happens. So there's time for questions, there's time to get more information, because information is almost power. It's empowering if we know more. And so the other thing there was linked to communication, which was about being able to have verbal feedback but also visual feedback, whether it's a copy of the results or an actual written summary. I mean, these are kind of the ideal scenarios that people in the focus group talked about, which of course isn't always happening.
And I think even so much more so at the moment. We did all of this work before COVID-19, and knowing that so many people are having video as of like telehealth, but not only that, they're not even having telehealth with the screen, so they can't even see the doctor or see the doctor's screen necessarily. Often it's just a phone call. So I'm imagining that these findings might be even more acute given the current circumstances.
Yes, that's right. And I think, you know, one of the interesting things I thought was that for many of us, these relationships with our oncologist is for the long term, because our disease goes for a long time. So hopefully, and in many cases. So how do we set up a routine with our oncologist that is satisfying to us, as well as meets the needs of the clinicians that we're dealing with? So, and that's quite challenging, you know, when you're the patient. But certainly being able to have dialogue versus, you know, here's the feedback, boom, is more challenging when it's done that way.
One of the things that I know from having worked with the clinicians around Australia is that something that I feel like I know that maybe patients don't necessarily have communicated clearly to them is some of the reasons why there might be delays between having the scan and getting the results. And but I feel like I want to tell people about some of the anecdotes that I hear where they've gone and got the report that the radiologist has written, having eyeballed their scan, but the radiologist may not be a net specialist, and they've read that report and freaked out because it makes it sound quite dire.
Yeah.
But then the scan's gone to the multidisciplinary team meeting, and and I sit in these multidisciplinary team meetings because I'm lucky enough to have been invited to observe several of these meetings, and there's often quite a lot of very rigorous discussion between clinicians and specialists about, well, is that lump growing, or is it just glowing more brightly? You know, is it a clinically significant finding? Are there any treatment changes that are required, or would you just sit and watch that one? Maybe it's just having a, you know, maybe it's just an artifact, like something that's sort of a result of the way the scan's been done. So the analysis of that image, it depends on the skill level of the person who's looking at the scan. And I think that if I probably didn't understand that anywhere near as well until I was a nurse and until I sat in on these meetings. And so I think, but I think that often contributes to delays. And sometimes people really worry about a delay, thinking that's a bad thing because it's being reviewed by the multidisciplinary team, whereas in fact, it may be that the multidisciplinary team may be quite reassuring about what that means compared to what the radiology report, what's written in the paper, on the piece of paper might say. So I don't know if there were reflections from you in observing the conversations in the focus group that you would mention. I know that, you know, there were people who waited weeks, and we know that not every state has a multidisciplinary team that meets every week. So it, But
I learned a lot about, you know, what goes on behind the scenes from the focus group, and also from being on the committee. So Nick Pavlakis is my oncologist as well. So it helped me understand what he does before he gives me my results. So, you know, they're obviously very busy people, and what they're dealing with is complex. I think there is, and so what I learned was that there is a lot of complicated processes that they have to work with as well, and there is often non-standard reporting from these scans. So I didn't know that. There is no Australia-wide kind of standard report that is used. So, and the value of the multidisciplinary team meetings is high, and so coordinating all of that, all the information back to the multidisciplinary team and then back to us, takes quite a bit of effort and coordination. It requires a lot of good administration support as well. So I think they're kind of dealing with quite complicated processes as well. And certainly that's one of the reasons why I think Nick has sparked that conversation, is to say, well, how can we do this better? And what can we learn from patients of what's important to them, so we can build that into the process. So, and I understand, Kate, they will, there's going to be a clinician survey as well to ask clinicians what gets in the way of them kind of being patient focused, which I think is really positive.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see those results. We've got a team of clinicians who are working on so we're about to talk about the online survey, but we are also working with a bunch of clinicians to do like a parallel. Well, it won't be parallel because they haven't got to it yet, but they will also be constructing questions to ask clinicians around Australia, net specialists, about, from their perspective, getting more information about that process and what they want on, getting to a consensus, I guess, about what are the really important elements of that scan report. So coming back to the online survey, and this is, I guess, a large part of, a bit of an ulterior motive on my part, because we've just released this survey, and I think it went out on the end of the month in June. So it's only had a few days, and I can see, I had a look before it, it's got 12 people who have answered it, which I actually think is really impressive, because it didn't come out with a big bang. I didn't post about it in the Facebook group. We haven't done a lot of promotion on it, and it's not a quick 5-minute job. So we know that it's SurveyMonkey told me it would take 15 minutes for people to fill out, but then when our consumer advisory group had a go, they were telling me that it was between 20 and 30 minutes. So I think it's asking for quite a lot of information. And I wanted to ask you, Jacqueline, because we had a lot of conversations about this before we wrote the survey, do we actually need an online survey given the really rich findings that we got from the focus group? And what else are we hoping to add to the information we already know?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things for the survey. I think a very practical reason is that oncologists and clinicians are very quantitative in the way they see information. So our focus group was very qualitative, which is rich, but we want both. And so we thought if we're able to collect data for our audience, they would kind of respond to that information in that way. So I think that's one of the very practical reasons, so that we have a rich quantitative and qualitative piece of work. But more importantly, I think, and this came through in the focus groups, is that we do ask people for suggestions. So how do you manage this process? Because it's such a big part of our lives. It impacts us all the time. And we ask people for suggestions on how do they deal with the anxiety, how do they manage the interactions with their oncologist or clinician. And so even in the focus group, we had suggestions that I found really helpful. And so what we would like to do is use the learning that we have in our community around this and share that around. So I think there's kind of two reasons. One is to help create some really good findings that are impactful, but secondly, to share some of the suggestions and learnings that people have. How do they manage anxiety? How do they become more assertive with the doctors? How do they make sure it's more a dialogue? How are we all educating ourselves around the disease? So I think they're the reasons for the survey, and I really encourage people to spend some time filling it in. That would be great.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, it's a real opportunity. Just knowing that, drilling down to the consumer advisor group, I'm always in awe of the expertise that's in the room when we meet, but also knowing, like, we know we've got 1,200 people in our Facebook support groups, and a vast quantity of people who aren't in that group, but who have become, over many years often, experts in managing their own condition, and they're certainly experts in knowing what they need. So I guess this is, from my perspective, a really amazing opportunity to speak almost like directly to the bunch of health professionals who manage NETs in Australia, and it'll go international. it's a real opportunity to give them very real feedback about what you need. Do you want pictures on the screen? Do you want a printout? Does it need to be a face-to-face conversation? Are there any insights around telehealth? You know, is a phone call just as good as using a screen? Now, we haven't built that into the survey, because when we built the survey, coronavirus wasn't on the horizon even. But there's lots of places in the survey for you to add your thoughts, and we'll be one of the things that we'll be doing once this survey closes at the end of the month is going through all of the comments and all of the findings with a fine-tooth comb and condensing that all down, and we will be presenting this at medical conferences, and also using these results in parallel with the health professionals research that we're doing as well, in order to build some really comprehensive recommendations for how these scans should be reported, how they should be communicated. Are there ideal timeframes? You know, how long is too long to wait between having a scan and getting a result? I mean, I've got some thoughts, but it would be interesting to, you know, to, I guess, get some, I know, like you said, Jacqueline, doctors speak graph language really well. They do spreadsheet and a graph, and I think you're right in that by getting quantitative data as well as the really rich qualitative data from the online focus group, that this will be translating the knowledge into a readable, kind of digestible format for these people who we're kind of really trying to change their behaviours. So we've got to speak their language in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think one of the reactions I have to getting my results is this kind of sense. I feel so vulnerable just before and during, you know, because you just don't know what is going to happen. So how do we feel a bit more in control? How do we manage this process so we're feeling as good as we can, given these results could go any way? How do we feel confident to ask questions and make sure we don't leave until we really understand what's going on? I think this is what, in my mind, this is how this survey can help all of us. So I'm really interested to hear people's experiences, and would love to keep working on the project, Kate. So help with the results, because that's helpful to me as well.
That's fantastic, and we will put the link to the survey in the notes in the Facebook group, and this one's going to go up onto YouTube as well, so we'll make sure we put the link in the notes there for people who would like to contribute to that emerging knowledge. Now, Jacqueline, while I've got you here, one thing that we did put out in our last e-newsletter, and we are just doing some gentle encouragement, trying to get the word out, and that is that Paul Martelli, who has been our Consumer Advisory Group representative from Western Australia for the last 4 years, so he's just done an amazing job in being the representative for the West in this group. He has retired, and we are so grateful to Paul for all of your efforts. If you're watching, Paul, that you've just made such a magnificent contribution. So we're looking for a new representative for Western Australia, and I guess this is an opportunity. If you're over in the West, your voice is so important, and you won't hear a bigger, more noisy advocate than me about that, because when I talk to people with nets in Western Australia, I see a lot of needs, and we do need a really passionate and strong voice for Western Australia to represent the state in our Consumer Advisory Group. Now, I wondered, we've got a whole heap of information on our website in terms of, role descriptions and terms of references and all this sort of thing. But given that you're chatting with us today, Jacqueline, I'm just wondering, from your experience, if you could just tell us in a nutshell what being part of the CAG, the Consumer Advisory Group, how that's important to you, and I guess what are the things that you get out of being part of that group?
Yeah, so I joined up, I think, about 18 months ago now. And for me, the reason I wanted to be part of CAG was for me to learn. And I think that's certainly a big part. I've learned a lot of information about this illness. But I also wanted to contribute and because I do have energy and I've just got to manage my energy. So how can I contribute to the broader agenda? So what I've found with the being on the advisory group is that, well, one is I've realised that the Unicorn Foundation does amazing work with very little resources. And so the Consumer Advisory Group plays an important role in, I guess, just helping the Unicorn Foundation with some of the decisions it has to make around a whole range of things. It could be related to interactions with pharmaceutical companies, or brochures or fact sheets that are going out, or how things might be better presented to a consumer. It's a range of activities, and it's just helpful for our broader community. We have a meeting once a month, and the beauty of that is meeting people from all around Australia, and the group is very diverse, so there's lots of great people with very different experiences of the disease, and everybody's contribution is welcomed and valued, and that's a lovely. I've worked in corporate all my career, and that doesn't always happen when you're in a corporate environment. So it's very positive environment to be in. And there's access. I think the other thing I've learned being on CAG is learning there's a lot of information that comes from overseas as well, that informs what's going on around the world in relation to research. So I think it's a great opportunity for someone in WA to, I guess, just represent the consumers, which is the patients, and to help that group of people in WA have a voice around some important decisions or some new and emerging research. And I think that's all very exciting.
Oh, thank you so much for telling us about your experiences, Jacqueline. And I'm so pleased that you feel like we're grateful, because gosh, we are, because you're right, we are a tiny organisation, and there is no way we would achieve anything near what we achieve without the efforts of our volunteers, and our consumer advisory group members are such an important part of that. And we've got lots of volunteers who work with us in lots of ways. Our support group facilitators, our Cancer Connect peer support volunteers, my two running buddies who help me with packing up parcels for you all every week. We've got someone who volunteers on graphic design, someone who volunteers with database management. So we're incredibly lucky, because if we didn't have that, I don't know what we would do, but it would be a lot less. So, and one of the things I love, like you said about the Consumer Advisory Group, is that we've got an incredible range of very capable people. It's a constant reminder to me that just because you have nets doesn't mean that you're not a whole person. I think sometimes when you walk into a hospital with a tumour, it's almost like you become a walking tumour. You need to have a pair of ears and a set of eyes and a brain to make decisions about the tumour, but it seems like everything's wrapped around that sort of focus. And they need to think about the tumour, that's their job at the hospitals, but we know that people with nets they've got much broader lives than just having a tumour. So I think one of the things I really appreciate about the Consumer Advisory Group is that it's so much more than having a tumour. It's and people contribute in amazing ways. So thank you, Jacqueline, for your contribution to that group. It's extraordinary, and it's been one of the amazingly, it's been a highlight for me, is working with this group of extraordinary people. So just before we close off today, I did want to give a plug, because next week, look, the conversation around clinical trials is a very hot topic. It's one that's ongoing, and it's one that we've got a lot of interest in, and we're really thrilled that Professor Tim Price from Adelaide, and I know that lots of you have heard of that name before, Tim Price has been working on a study looking at a substance called rose bengal, and it's had a lot of interest from all around Australia and actually internationally as well. And so I'm pretty excited that we've managed to pin him down to talk with us next Friday at 1 o'clock in Facebook Friday, and we're going to be using Zoom again. I think this might not have crashed this time, which is a first for me, but we will be recording the conversation. So if you aren't available to watch live next Friday at 1 o'clock Melbourne time, then don't worry, the video will be up there for you to watch when you're ready. So yeah, it's a chance for us to have a think in between now and then about questions that you might like to ask Tim, not only about the Rose Bengal trial, but about clinical trials more generally. So I'm really looking forward to that. So look, I thank you everybody for dialing in, or to, you know, what is it, tuning in, hopping in and watching the conversation today. I hope that's been useful for you. We just really wanted to tell you about this research so that you knew what the potential impact of you doing that study, that survey will be, and would really encourage you to hop in and do that. You've got till the end of July, so there is a little bit of time. We'll give you reminders. So, you know, if you don't have time today, you're worried about forgetting, then we will give you a little prod, but hopefully that'll remind you about at least listening to this conversation and having some idea about why we want you to spend 20 to 30 minutes of your time telling us what you think. So look, thank you. Jacqueline, is there anything else that you wanted to add before we finish off?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Kate. And thanks for everything you do, Kate, as well. It's amazing. You're amazing.
I think I'm the luckiest nurse in the world, because I think I really do have the best job. So yeah, look, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jacqueline. And I'll look forward to seeing you all next week.